Before pottage and porridge, peasants often made portable cakes from mashed beans and barley flour. Vendors fried or baked these thick patties over coals, serving them with a drizzle of vinegar or garlic oil. Packed with protein and easy to carry, these travel cakes were an early version of the veggie patty. They could last for days without spoiling, perfect for workers, travellers, and soldiers on the move. Fried foods were medieval favourites. Onion and leek fritters were quick, cheap, and delicious. Made from ground barley or rye flour and fried crisp in animal fat. They were a noisy, fragrant street snack, eaten hot with a pinch of salt or vinegar, making them one of the earliest forms of fried fast food. While nobles dined on fine cuts, peasants took what was left: heart, liver, or lung. Vendors grilled these offal skewers over open flames, the smoky scent drawing hungry workers from every corner. This cheap, high-protein food became a street staple in cities like London and Bruges, proving that nothing went to waste. These small, sweet treats were made from crushed nuts, oats and honey, pressed into chewy cakes. Vendors sold them at markets and festivals to travellers and children. They were considered a luxury among peasants, an early energy bar that blended sweetness and sustenance in a bite-sized snack. Eels were everywhere, from rivers to royal kitchens. Street vendors baked eel-filled pastries seasoned with herbs and onions, selling them hot to passers-by. They were rich, oily, and surprisingly affordable. Eel pies were so popular that some English towns became famous for them, especially along the Thames. For those who couldn't afford meat, this vegetable stew was served in hollowed loaves of bread. The bread soaked up the hot broth, turning into an edible bowl. It was warm, filling, and could be eaten entirely. A clever no-waste meal for workers and travellers alike. A winter classic, roasted chestnuts were sold straight from the pan. Their warm, nutty scent filled city squares and market alleys. Cheap, comforting and portable, they were one of the few snacks enjoyed by rich and poor alike. A timeless street food that still exists today. Salted fish was a medieval staple, and small hand pies filled with minced herring or cod were a popular tavern and street snack. Mixed with mustard, onions or herbs, these portable pies were perfect for dock workers and travellers on the road. A thrifty creation, leftover stew cooled and solidified, then cut into blocks and skewered. Vendors reheated them over coals, turning yesterday's meal into a chewy, savoury street snack. It was an odd but practical way to stretch food supplies and minimise waste. A favourite among tavern goers, these were made by soaking old bread in ale, mixing it with fruit, spices and eggs, then frying it into golden balls. Sweet, boozy and hearty, they were often sold late at night to people leaving taverns. The medieval version of a street-side night snack. 10 medieval ingredients that terrified people more than they tempted them. Lemons were rare, expensive, and suspicious. Their acidity was thought to sour the blood and rot the stomach. Doctors warned they disrupted digestion and unbalanced the humours. While sometimes used in medicine, most avoided them in daily meals. Late to Europe, tomatoes were seen as dangerous. Their resemblance to deadly nightshade and their reaction with pewter plates caused real poisonings. Nicknamed devil's apples, they were blamed for illness, lust, and even death. Known as mad apples, eggplants were believed to cause insanity, leprosy, or demonic possession. Their bitter taste and dark colour made them suspicious, and some thought they stirred lust or mental instability. Garlic protected against evil, but it was also feared. Its strong scent and fiery nature were said to excite passions, overheat the blood, and disrupt spiritual purity. Monks often avoided it completely. Mushrooms were a deadly gamble. Edible and poisonous varieties looked alike, and without modern science, many feared them. Folk tales claimed they were food for witches or traps set by fairies. Fava beans killed some people without warning, a result of G6PD deficiency, unknown at the time. The cause was mysterious, so many blamed curses, sin, or divine wrath. Some monasteries banned them entirely. While cooked onions were common, raw ones were feared. Believed to inflame the spleen, rot the gut, and cloud the mind, they were often seen as disruptive to both health and behaviour. Leeks were avoided in religious life due to their link with passion and lust. Their strong scent and flavour were thought to inflame the blood, stir desire, and shame the soul. Used in cooking and medicine, caraway seeds were feared in excess. Said to cause strange dreams, madness, or sleep disturbances, they were also tied to spells, control, and enchantment. Parsnips were humble, but suspicious. Thought to be cold and moist, they were blamed for weakening the body, causing wind and disturbing the humours. Nobles often avoided them for being too rustic and rot-inducing. These once cursed ingredients are reminders of how strange and dangerous the kitchen used to be. Food didn't just fill stomachs, it saved lives. Imagine vats of fish guts baking in the sun for weeks. That was garum, a salty, fermented fish sauce passed down from Roman times and still used in parts of medieval Europe. It reeked like death but added flavour and essential nutrients. Peasants, monks, even nobles poured it over meat, bread, and vegetables. It stank, but it stayed edible. Water could kill you. So people turned to ale, weak, warm, cloudy, and constantly bubbling. This was small beer, made from fermented barley. It wasn't refreshing, but it was safer than water. It fueled armies, fed children, and carried just enough alcohol to keep illness at bay. Cheese was never just cheese. Some varieties, especially in rural areas, were deliberately left to rot until they wriggled with life. Maggots helped break down fats, giving the cheese a soft, creamy texture. Disgusting? Maybe. But in an age without fridges, it was prized. Boiled eggs soaked in beer, and herbs lasted weeks, even months. The pickling brine fermented into a vinegar-like sludge, which preserved the eggs and added a sharp bite. Soldiers carried them, tavern goers loved them, and the funk was just part of the package. Fresh milk spoiled fast, so they used it sour. Mixed with oats, barley, or rye, it became porridge. Add onions, herbs, maybe a scrap of bacon, and you had a meal. Children were raised on it. The sick survived on it. It was stomach-churning, but nourishing. Herring was shipped by the barrel across Europe. Salted, dried, and left to ferment, it arrived sticky, grey, and pungent. But it lasted through winter, Lent, and famine. The smell might have cleared a room, but it fed millions. Poor harvest? Eat what you can. Sometimes that meant mouldy rye bread, but one mould, Claviceps purpurea, caused ergot poisoning. Vomiting, burning limbs, convulsions, and visions. Entire villages were struck. People thought they were cursed. In truth, they were poisoned by rot they couldn't see. Rotten apples, pears, or berries were mashed and left to ferment into vinegar. Mixed with herbs and honey, it became a drink to restore strength, settle stomachs, and even fight plague. Sour, sharp, and mouth-puckering. It was both medicine and refreshment. Before probiotics had a name, people drank the cloudy, sour water from pickled cabbage jars. It kept digestion going during lean months and offered rare vitamins in winter. It was essentially medieval sauerkraut juice. And yes, it smelled like death. Soft cheeses washed in ale or cider developed a wet rind that oozed and stank. One ancestor of today's stinking bishop was so foul-smelling it was banned from some churches, but it packed fat, protein, and salt into a transportable, long-lasting, nose-wilting bundle of survival. These foods may have smelled like death, but without them, many wouldn't have lived at all. Medieval cuisine wasn't just about roasted boars and trenchers of stew. It was also filled with the strange, the experimental, and sometimes the downright confusing. Green cheese referred to young, unaged cheeses, often soft, tangy, and made quickly after milking. but some were intentionally green, coloured with sage, nettles, or even spinach. The odd hue wasn't just for fun, it symbolised freshness and herbal health. This cheese didn't last long, which is why you had to eat it fast, and possibly hold your nose. Barley or oat porridge was a common peasant food, but to stretch it further and add protein, people mixed in animal blood and old ale. It sounds awful, but it provided nutrition and calories. The alcohol cooked off, but the metallic beery tang remained. This kind of bloody porridge was considered hearty enough for labourers, and sometimes even fed to the sick as medicine. With church-imposed fasts banning animal products over 150 days a year, substitutes were necessary. Enter pea milk. Boiled, mashed peas were strained into a pale, thin liquid, used like milk. It went into sauces, custards, and soups, often fooling no one. It was gritty, earthy, and definitely not creamy. It was common to find pea milk recipes in monasteries' ledgers. When flour ran short during war, siege, or famine, people turned to desperate measures. One of the strangest, fern root bread. Fern rhizomes were dug up, dried, crushed, and added to dough. The result was bitter, fibrous, and nearly inedible, but it kept people alive. In Iceland and parts of Scandinavia, this kind of survival bread was even considered safer than mouldy rye, which could cause hallucinations. Here's one to break your brain. During fasts, people still craved creamy textures, so cooks combined sweetened fish broth with eggs or almond milk, seasoned with sugar, cinnamon, and ginger. The result was fishy pudding. Royal chefs included these in lavish fast day feasts. Imagine a banquet where your dessert tastes like sweet soup with hints of trout. You won't find this one at the bakery. Toadstones, believed to be magical gems from a toad's head, were actually fossilised fish teeth. People ground them into powder and baked them into pies or tarts for protection against poison. This was so common that wealthy families had dedicated toadstone rings. They'd dip in food before eating, just in case someone was trying to kill them. Think jelly made from roses, violets, or marigolds sounds lovely. Now add vinegar and garlic. That's how medieval flour jelly worked. It wasn't just for sweetness. It was thought to balance the humours and improve digestion. Some flour jellies were dyed with saffron or beetroot and shaped in moulds of animals or faces, more artistic than appetising. Forget ovens. Some medieval foods were wrapped in clay and buried in coals to cook. When peeled open, the clay took off fur, feathers, or skin, leaving a perfectly steamed item beneath, be it bird, egg, or even root vegetable. This technique was surprisingly hygienic. In fact, it survived into early modern cooking, especially in rural areas. If your ale was flat and weak, why not improve it with sawdust? Brewers sometimes steeped ale in aromatic wood shavings like oak or fir, or bitter herbs like wormwood, to stretch it and add flavour, often more medicinal than tasty. Some unscrupulous sellers used it to cover up spoiled beer. Medieval authorities eventually had to regulate beer quality because of tricks like this. Egg whites were whipped, simmered, and jellied with vinegar and herbs, then moulded into fancy shapes and served cold. These weird egg jellies were dyed yellow with saffron, or red with hibiscus, and meant to impress guests. They were more about status and creativity than flavour. Sometimes they even glistened with edible gold dust. Food was a blend of scarcity, superstition, and status, and that led to some truly unforgettable dishes. Forget basic bread and cheese. Medieval royalty dined like gods, from rare imports guarded like treasure to dishes so complex they required their own rituals. Food was far more than fuel. It was power. It was pageantry. It was politics. Eggs weren't just breakfast. They were royal building blocks of luxury cuisine. Boiled, baked, stuffed with saffron and almond milk, or wrapped in gold leaf, eggs symbolised fertility and divine favour. Special breeds of hens were kept just for royal households. Some kitchens used over 1,000 eggs per feast, and egg-based dishes were so prestigious that they often appeared at coronations. Before cow's milk was common in noble diets, almond milk was king. Smooth, rich and shelf-stable, it was used in sauces, stews and desserts. Almond milk was so prized that kings imported almonds by the ton. During Lent, when dairy was banned, almond milk kept royal dishes rich and creamy, without violating religious rules. Aspic was edible art. Meat stock was boiled until it jellied, flavoured with herbs and poured into ornate moulds. Some jellies encased flowers, birds, or whole-cooked fish. Royal chefs crafted illusion foods, gelatinous sculptures that looked like jewelled relics or even landscapes, meant to dazzle guests and intimidate rivals at the table. From cranes to herons, medieval kings hunted or imported exotic birds for their tables. But peacocks were the crown jewel, roasted then dressed in their own plumage and beak. These were served not for taste, but as trophies, a show of dominion over nature and wealth. Swans, meanwhile, were often royal property, marked with ownership notches on their beaks. Eels were fatty, abundant and easy to preserve. Kings consumed them fried, jellied or baked in elaborate pies shaped like dragons or shields. Eels were so valuable, they were used to pay rent and taxes. One English monastery owed the crown over 500,000 eels a year, and you can bet many ended up on royal plates. Pine nuts were small but mighty, used in everything from sauces to sweets. Their subtle, creamy flavour was perfect for rich medieval dishes. Because they had to be laboriously harvested by hand from tough pine cones and transported long distances, pine nuts were more expensive than some spices and treated like edible pearls. These Middle Eastern imports were often mashed into spreads, candies, or added to meat dishes for a sweet savoury mix. Figs were seen as a symbol of wisdom and prosperity. Royal apothecaries praised them as health foods and aphrodisiacs. Kings gifted fig and date treats to favoured allies and visiting envoys as edible diplomacy. Kings loved floral flavours. Rosewater and orange blossom syrups were drizzled over pastries, meats and even rice. They were fragrant, exotic and extremely costly. These ingredients were so luxurious that entire court gardens were devoted to cultivating roses and bitter oranges solely for royal kitchens and apothecaries. Hippocras was a luxurious spiced wine, enjoyed warm or cold, often served at the end of royal meals. It was made by infusing red or white wine with a mixture of cinnamon, ginger, cloves, sugar, and sometimes rosewater. Named after the ancient physician Hippocrates, this drink was thought to aid digestion and extend life. It was so revered that special Hippocras chambers existed in royal households, and the drink was typically reserved for high-ranking guests. The preparation itself was ceremonial. Wine was filtered through a Hippocrates sleeve, a cone-shaped cloth bag, and presented in silver goblets with great flair. More than candy, marzipan was edible propaganda. Shaped into animals, saints, or entire battle scenes, these almond sugar sculptures were centerpiece desserts for royal banquets. Highly skilled artisans were employed just to make marzipan art. Some pieces were painted with natural dyes and cost more than a knight's yearly salary. To eat like a king in the Middle Ages meant more than full bellies. It meant showing the world your wealth, wisdom, and power. We all know about mead and meat pies, but the medieval world had a sweet tooth too. Peri jelly was a shimmering treat made from fermented pear juice and honey, thickened into a wobbly jelly. The wealthy often spiced it with cinnamon or clove and poured it into moulds shaped like animals or shields. Peri was considered safer to drink than water, and when turned into jelly, it became both medicine and dessert. Frumenti may sound humble, but on feast days it became something magical. This sweetened wheat porridge was enriched with milk, eggs and honey, then topped with dried fruits like figs, raisins and dates. It was traditionally served at Christmas and even accompanied roasted venison during noble feasts. Comfits were the original medieval candy. Fennel, aniseed or coriander seeds were coated in layer after layer of hardened sugar. They were believed to aid digestion, so much so that nobles carried boxes of comfits to banquets and handed them out like party favours. Apple muse was thick, warm and fragrant, a sort of medieval applesauce pudding. Apples were stewed with wine, breadcrumbs and spices like cinnamon and ginger. This dessert was often used to soften stale bread, turning food waste into a sweet, elegant dish. Lèche Lombard was a sliceable custard made from almond milk, honey, and exotic spices like mace and saffron. It looked like fudge but tasted like a warm, nutty pudding. This was a favourite among the nobility, with versions recorded in the 14th century English and Italian cookbooks. Pain perdu, essentially medieval French toast, soaked in egg and milk, fried in butter, then topped with honey or sugar. In a time when wasting bread was unthinkable, pain perdu was a clever and delicious solution. Tarte de Brie was made from soft, ripened cheese, like brie, mixed with eggs, sugar, and spices inside a pastry shell. It was creamy, savoury, and just sweet enough to be served as dessert. It blurs the line between sweet and savoury, much like modern cheesecake. A fleeting spring delight. Elderflower fritters were made by dipping whole blossoms in batter and frying them crisp. Once cooked, they were dusted with sugar or drizzled with honey. Elderflowers bloom for only a short time, so these fritters were a rare seasonal treat, often linked to fertility rituals. Sucket was the medieval answer to fruit candy. Fruits and peels were boiled in sugar syrup, with spices, creating sticky, spiced jewels served in ornate bowls. Suckets were served with special silver sucket forks, early utensils for sweets. Chairisai, or cherry eyes, was a rich pudding made from cherries, wine, honey and rice flour. The result was thick, smooth and deeply flavourful. Medieval cooks believed red fruits promoted good health and balanced the humours of the body. Wafers were thin, crispy cakes often eaten with warm spiced wine or fruit syrups. They were a treat for special occasions like weddings or church feasts. They were sometimes printed with religious or noble insignias, a medieval take on edible branding. Doucettes were luxurious egg custards sweetened with honey and perfumed with rosewater or saffron. Baked gently, they had a smooth, almost silky texture. The name comes from the Old French doucette, meaning little sweet thing, and it was often served at the end of high feasts. Medlar is the medieval fruit that needed to rot before it could be eaten. Sounds gross? Actually, it's a process called bletting, where the fruit softens and sweetens after harvesting. Once bletted, it has the texture of applesauce and a flavour often compared to spiced dates or baked apples. Shakespeare called it open-arse fruit because, well, take a look. Medlars were a delicacy in Tudor England and often featured in pies and preserves. They also symbolised decay and time, making appearances in poetry and art. Looking like a lumpy apple and smelling like perfume, the quince was once more popular than apples themselves. Too tough and sour to eat raw, quinces were cooked into jellies and pastes like membrillo, still loved in Spain today. In medieval Europe, quince was also prized for its medicinal properties. It was believed to aid digestion, sweeten breath, and even strengthen the heart. Also known as Juneberries, these small blue-purple fruits taste like a mix of blueberries and almonds. They were often foraged by villagers and baked into rustic tarts. Their name may come from Appalachian funerals. Service berries bloomed when the ground thawed enough to hold burial services. Sloe berries are as medieval as chainmail. These tart fruits from the blackthorn tree were turned into syrups, vinegars, and the ancestor of modern sloe gin. People never ate them raw. They're far too astringent. Instead, they were steeped in alcohol or sweetened with honey to bring out their deep, plummy flavour. The cornelian cherry may look like a cranberry, but its taste is tangy and citrusy, like sour cherry and lime. Popular in Byzantine and Eastern European cuisines, this fruit was often made into jams, fermented drinks, and even pickled. Romans loved it too. Legions carried the tough wood for spears and the fruit for energy. Mulberries were so beloved in the Middle Ages, some monasteries cultivated them for their sweet juice and for silkworms, which feed exclusively on mulberry leaves. The black mulberry, in particular, was eaten fresh, dried, or turned into wine, and they stain everything, a symbol of fleeting beauty and often linked to ancient myths like Pyramus and Thisbe. Tiny, tangy, and electric red, barberries were prized for their zing. Used in medieval sauces and syrups, they also served medicinal purposes, especially for fevers. Though banned in some areas due to a link to wheat diseases, they remained popular in kitchens and gardens until forgotten by modern diets. Damsons are the dark horse of the plum family. Tart and tannic, they were perfect for stewing with meat, making jams and even flavouring ale. The name may trace back to Damascus, suggesting a long journey from the Middle East to the English orchard. Yes, jujubes are real fruit, not just chewy candy. Known as the Chinese date, they were brought to Europe via the Silk Road. Dried, they're chewy and date-like. Fresh, they're crisp and apple-like. Medieval herbalists valued them for calming the nerves and aiding sleep. The strawberry tree, or Arbutus unidu, was said to be eaten once because the taste was forgettable. But these fruits were fermented into wines and liqueurs by monks and foragers. It's one of the few fruits that ripens in autumn and blooms at the same time, making it a symbol of rebirth and duality. Rowan berries were more than food, they were magic. Medieval people believed the tree protected against witches and evil spirits. When cooked, the bitter berries made excellent jelly, often paired with game meats. In hard times, they were dried and ground into flour substitutes. Also called the wild service tree, this fruit tastes like dates and malt after bletting. Checker fruits were fermented into a kind of rustic cider or ale, and inns named the Checkers across Britain reference this very tree. They were so culturally tied to drinking that they lent their name to the Chancellor's residence, Chequers. And though many faded from our tables, they still grow in hedgerows and old gardens, waiting for curious minds to rediscover their taste. We've all heard of medieval meat pies and mead, but what about the vegetables that filled the tables of castles, monasteries, and peasant homes? Today we're looking into history to unearth 12 forgotten vegetables of the medieval world. Some were culinary staples, others medicinal marvels. All are rare in modern kitchens. Skirret, funny name, serious flavour. This sweet white root, with its mild taste reminiscent of carrot and parsnip, was a favourite in medieval kitchens. The name skirret comes from the Dutch suikerwortel, or sugar root, a nod to its natural sweetness. Boiled, roasted, or even fried in batter, skirret was considered a delicacy of the elite. Charlemagne reportedly demanded it in his royal gardens. It's a perennial too, meaning once planted, it fed people for years. With a name fit for royalty and a nickname of poor man's asparagus, Good King Henry was a reliable wild green. This plant was often foraged near homes and farms, leading it to be one of the earliest homegrown vegetables of Europe. Its young shoots were eaten like asparagus, while the mature leaves were cooked like spinach. Before celery ruled the kitchen, there was Alexander's. Grown by Romans and passed on through the medieval period, this bold, peppery herb flavoured everything from soups to salted fish. It was so popular that it was often planted along monastery walls, and nearly every part is edible: root, leaf, stem, and flower. Recognise the name rampion. You might know it as Rapunzel. Yes, that Rapunzel. In the fairy tale, her mother craved this plant so badly, she risked everything. That's because rampion's root is nutty and tender, and its leaves can be eaten raw or cooked. It was such a valuable salad plant that theft from noble gardens was not uncommon. Don't let the appearance fool you. Scortanera, also known as black salsify, has a creamy oyster-like flavour when cooked. Its name means viper's herb in Spanish, due to its supposed ability to treat snake bites. Once considered a cure for the plague, it was a prized root in both culinary and apothecary gardens. Blanched and buried in sand, sea kale shoots were a coastal treasure. This seaside vegetable was a staple in monastic gardens, especially in the British Isles. In Victorian times, it made a comeback and was considered a gourmet delicacy in Britain. What if you could eat your parsley from the bottom up? Parsley root is a forgotten cousin of the common herb, cultivated for its white, aromatic root. Used in broths, stews, and even sweet dishes, it had a parsley meets carrot flavour. Medieval cooks favoured it over carrots, in regions where orange carrots had yet to dominate the field. While we still eat turnips, the greens often go to waste, but in the medieval world, they were essential. Boiled, pickled, or sautéed with vinegar and spices, turnip tops were rich in nutrients and flavour. Turnip greens were so valued that crop rotation systems were designed in part to ensure their steady supply. Strong, savoury, and celery-like, lovage was the medieval MSG. Used to flavour broths, meats and sauces, it was also brewed into teas and digestive tonics. Monks planted it widely for both food and medicine. Think lettuce is just for salads? Meet Cheltus, a variety grown for its crunchy, juicy stem. It was often peeled and stir-fried, and its mild, nutty flavour made it popular in Asia and parts of southern Europe. Though Celtus faded from European fields, it's still popular in Chinese cuisine today. With a taste like sweet chestnuts and parsnip, chervil root was a prized winter food. It was slow to grow but stored well, ideal for lean months in medieval climates. This root was so delicate in flavour that nobles reserved it for fine stews and feast day dishes. We still use the root to spice up our roasts, but in medieval times, horseradish leaves were just as important. Their peppery bite added kick to meat pies, sausages, and fresh salads. Beyond food, horseradish was thought to cure everything from scurvy to snake bites. Truly a hot commodity, from castle banquets to peasant stews, these vegetables once fed medieval Europe with flavour, variety, and vital nutrients.